Well, welcome everyone to the Logical Belief Ministries podcast. Doing an unusual one this weekend, having actually two broadcasts this weekend. Did one yesterday on continuationism and cessationism, but we are doing another broadcast today, and I have had the unfortunate pleasure of having Andrew Rappaport crash into my studio, and he's taking over. He's doing all kind. I don't even know what he's doing over here, but he is. Let's go ahead and switch the camera here so you guys can see. Yes, there he is. He has joined in, and we have no idea what's even going to happen today, but we'll see. So Andrew attended our church this morning, and our little Bethel community church. And what were your thoughts, Andrew?
Well, I thought it was going to look two things. Anytime that I see any pastor properly handle the Old Testament is always good. So few people want to deal with the Old Testament, and then to deal with it well, to deal with one of my favorite topics, the New Covenant. I think so few people really understand the importance of the Old Testament, how an Old Testament believer would view the New Testament, New Covenant, I should say, the importance of it, going from a group of a nation of believers to individual believers. Going from a national covenant where the covenant is you're separated from God through all the priests, and even in the temple you have the temple where people can go, but then you have the holy place, the Holy of Holies, all this separation, going from that into an individual covenant where you and I, as believers in Jesus Christ, have the Holy Spirit indwelling us.
We go from the commands of God written on stone to tablets of flesh in our hearts. So yeah, it's we have a tremendous blessing. My wife and I and our son, by attending Bethel Community Church. It's just a small church here in Sarasota, but we have some really faithful teachers of the Word. We have Russ Atmore, who is our teaching elder. And if anybody's interested, if you go to bethelcomchurch.org or .com, you can actually listen to all the sermons there.
So you go to a Bethel church, huh?
Yeah. Well,
I was concerned when I saw the name.
Well, it was kind of interesting when I was in Vegas, and I went to Church of the Lakes there, and I told them the name of my church was Bethel. They they weren't too happy about that either. So no, this is not Bethel in Redding, California. So we do not associate with that church in any capacity. So, but yeah, we are just a small Reformed Baptist church. And if you go to bethelcomchurch.org or .com, you can listen to Russ's teachings. He's a really good expositor of the Word, and he's a brilliant man. He can read Greek and Hebrew like it's his everyday life. It's crazy. You know, I'll give him like Greek texts, like when I'm talking to him after church, and he'll tell me all the tenses of all the verbs. He'll just tell me everything about it. It's just crazy. I couldn't believe you could do that.
You don't need Logos. You have your pastor.
I just have my pastor. I don't need to spend money on Logos. So yeah, no, it's a really blessing, and it's good to have Andrew there this morning. So I was glad to have him and his wife attend. So we came home, and we fed him something. So hopefully they'll survive. Hopefully you made it through the meal. So
I've been in foreign countries before.
Yeah.
I've eaten things I don't know what they are, and I probably didn't want to ask.
Just don't ask. Just don't ask.
Don't ask, don't tell. Okay.
Yeah, that's the way we keep it here. So yeah. All right. So we wanted to talk about a few things, but one of the things I think we wanted to talk about is something that I think is there's things going on out there in the world of the Christian podcasting world and blogosphere, and I think it's both it's a concern that both you and I have with some of the attitudes and just some of the things that have been happening out there. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about reconciliation, biblical reconciliation, and how us as Christians should treat our brothers and sisters in Christ when we have disagreements with them on what we would maybe even say secondary issues. And sometimes the issues are not even theological in nature at all. Might have a difference in preference. It was interesting that Russ, our pastor, when he was teaching in Sunday school this morning, he was talking about how often us as Christians will throw each other under the bus, and will have conflicts over things as ridiculous as the color of the drapes in the church. And we talk about, we kind of laugh about those things, but you know how often we've seen those types of conflicts.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy, but us as Christians should be shining examples of those who can forgive others, can reconcile when we have differences, and we should be examples to the world in those particular areas. And I see Andrew is pulling up his flow diagram on the process of reconciliation. So I'll let him. What do you have for us, Andrew?
Oh, you're cheating. No, I just pulled it up because I don't know if we might get into that. But it's something that we make available on our website. Is a process of reconciliation chart, and basically what it is, it's a flow chart that helps people to see, when we get into personal conflict. We'll start with that before we get into ministry. What you end up seeing is that people will get emotional, and emotions can make reconciliation even harder. Because what ends up happening is when you get into arguments emotionally, you're not thinking through it as much.
Yeah.
So I developed a chart just to help when I'm counseling couples, is where I started it, but to counsel people on when you're having a conflict, how to go about the process of trying to think your way through the process. So, there's questions that we have in here is, is whatever the issue is. That's interesting.
Hopefully you're not having a problem.
Yeah.
It's .com?
It's .com or .org. Either one should work. But
I don't want to distract you there.
Yeah.
But
so here's the thing: is that we look at it, and the first question you should ask is, you're going to say there's a sin issue. Well, is it a preference issue?
Yeah.
The color of the drapes, the color of the carpet, things like that.
I wouldn't have done it that way.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
There are things that are preferences. I mean, we are human beings created in different ways. Mm-hmm. God has, created me in a different way than other Christians. And so we need to be able to have the ability to discern those differences. And a lot of times I don't see people being able to make those category distinctions within Christianity. If somebody doesn't do it the way that we do it all the time, then we're so quick to go to that's being a sin problem, instead of it just being there. We do it a different way,
or the way we think it should be done.
Yeah. Because
we may even accept that there could be another way, but this is the way I think it should be done.
Yeah.
And therefore it should be done this way.
Yeah.
And it could be a preference issue. I mean, the type of music that people would have, it's going to be actually under the store.
Is that where it's at? Because I've seen it there before, so that's what I was trying to find.
So the thing is, these are issues that we have that are just preference. I prefer this over that. And so, yeah. Click right there.
Just go into it right there.
I know you're trying to bring it up for folks that are watching live. But so what he's bringing up is just that he's on the strivingforeternity.org at the store, and at the bottom of the page it's a process of reconciliation flow chart. And but basically, is it a preference issue? Is it just something I prefer this over that? Is it a issue of, are you actually in sin?
Yeah.
Is the issue that you have a disagreement a sin issue? And I think, let's see. You have it. Are you in sin? is the first question, right? Because if you and I have a conflict, maybe you're not the one in the wrong, but I think you are. Maybe it's actually me that's wrong.
Yeah.
That could be
self-examination.
So, exactly. Before you go to another person, you look at yourself first and go through this and then say, okay, you know what? I've looked through this carefully. I don't think I'm in sin. I think the other person did something. Is what they did actually a sin? Can you accept it? Can you forbear it? And the whole idea is going through it to say, hey, you know what? We need to keep this as private as possible. This is one thing that I think is the big problem with social media. Someone does something you think is a sin, keeping it as private as possible until it has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
In other words, go through, is it a sin? It is a sin. It's not me in sin. They're in sin. It is a big enough issue to address. And if you go to Matthew 18, which everyone's quick to get over.
Yes.
The thing I find go ahead.
Well, I was gonna just bring one thing up, is that one of the things I've seen that abused sometimes. So I'd like to maybe is where often, especially those of us that are in discernment ministries, that when we address someone or a particular teacher, and I've had this happen myself, even in a church that we went to prior to the one we're going to now, is when bringing up a particular teacher that was teaching something false, actually being told that we needed to try to contact them personally and try to address a very, very public figure in evangelicalism, and to address them privately in order to comply with Matthew 18. If the sinful teaching and error is done publicly, is that a requirement for us to go in private and try to reach out to that ministry or that person? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's where we go to 1 Corinthians 5. Okay, because the process is still there, but there's times where when the sin is public, in 1 Corinthians 5, you have a man sleeping with his father's wife, and it's public, and it's bringing a stain on the church. So because of the public nature, Paul is basically saying, no, you address that quickly, publicly, and condemn it.
And we also have an example of that in Galatians, where Paul addressed Peter publicly because his sin was public.
Yeah.
And so I think there are times where that does need to be done. But I think that's where, as Christians, there needs to be some discernment, and there needs to be a lot of self-examination before we do these things. And if there are false teachers, and there are those that are teaching things that ought not to be taught, and things that are against historical Orthodox Christianity and the biblical text, then it is imperative for us to sometimes go publicly and denounce these things. But when it is something with a brother and a sister of whom we already have interaction with,
well, that's going to be different. I mean,
that's
remember,
going to be a different situation. Yeah.
Matthew 18 really is focused within a church.
Within a church, yes.
Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is an abuse that social media has created. One of the things I was going to say is that what you see often in Facebook, I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but someone disagrees with something you say or something you do, and the first thing is, you're slandering people. I want the number of your pastor.
Yes. Yeah.
You skipped several steps there, right? It's just, I don't agree with you. I'm going to call your pastor.
Yeah.
Or, I've had that happen. I've had it where they want to, I've actually had someone contacted my board of directors at the ministry. Really? And it was really funny because they were demanding I apologize on something. And it's like, you had that apology about 4 hours before you contacted the board of directors.
Yeah.
You didn't need to take it the next step. You skipped steps, and you kept trying to push an issue.
Yeah.
This is a thing where when you look at Matthew 18, everyone they're familiar with it. They want to jump to it and go, oh, well, we got to go through Matthew 18. But they forget that the very first, in Matthew 18:15, it ends up saying, your brother has, you've sinned against your brother. They've sinned against you. And by the way, it has to be a sin. It's not just a preference.
Yes.
But, my brother sins against me. And if you look in there, it says you go and tell him your fault between you and your brother, and no one notices that next word, alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't go tell your best friend and gossip about what the person did. You don't go to Facebook and say, oh, so-and-so did this, or even to play it in a coy way where everyone can know who you're talking about, but you don't give their name and say, well, see, now I'm not violating this. The issue is you go to them alone if possible. Now, if it's someone like you're saying that has a public ministry, if it's someone I know where I can contact them privately,
yes, yeah,
I always do it that way, because if I address it publicly, and we'll get to this later, but they're less likely to repent publicly.
yeah,
They're more likely, unfortunately, to dig their heels in, and we see this in ministries, and try to protect their ministry, so they don't deal with it the way they might if it's private. So I would always say, even if is someone that you can contact publicly.
Yeah.
I had opportunity. Robert Schuller's son, Robert Schuller Jr. Friended me on Facebook, and so I took the opportunity. He added me on Facebook. I had a private dialogue now with him. Shared how I used to watch his father's programs, and when I was in a Jewish home, and how that was basically almost the only Christianity I had gotten.
Yeah.
And he was appreciative. We started having dialogue, and then I started saying, through lots of conversations, I started explaining how I ended up realizing that some of the things his father and he believe are wrong, and here's why. And we kept the conversation going for a while. He eventually cut it off. I had plans to try to get out and have dinner with him.
Yeah.
And see, in a case like that, he opened that avenue up so that I can have that private conversation of correction. And explaining.
Sometimes, it comes down to if we're in that situation, but Matthew 18 is specifically speaking about the local church.
Correct.
And in often cases, it's abused in trying to extend it into a broader context, where I think that we need to make efforts to do those in the broader context if we have that opportunity. But if we don't have that opportunity, and there is something that is being taught that is an error, it is our duty for the protection of the sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Because as any of us, if we're teachers or for in any capacity that we can warn people of a particular false teaching or something that should be concerned about, it is also upon us in order to protect the sheep and to protect the people of God. And so there's definitely time, and we have biblical precedents for doing that, as you brought up 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and you also have Paul in Galatians.
And yet, but if you see, like with Matthew 18, and even like throughout where Paul talks about needing to rebuke someone, the goal is always keeping it as private as you can.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not about pushing it out there so that everyone can see, hey, this person's doing this. The idea is to keep it as private as possible. And that's why if you think your brother sinned, you go to him alone, because it's going to be easier to confront somebody if it's not known, their pride isn't being, attacked in the sense, the more you do that, the less likely, unfortunately, because we all suffer the effects of living in a sinful world and having influence of sin. We have the effect where we can succumb to our own pride. So the best thing to do is to keep it as private as possible. And when there is a time you have to go public, and just like in Matthew 18, there is a time you have to go the next step. But even with that, the next step is, and so many people misunderstand this, the second step of church discipline is not getting 2 or 3 people that agree with you. In other words, you do something I think is wrong. I don't grab 2 people that I tell them what I think you did wrong and then bring them to talk to you.
Yeah.
Okay, they're to be either eyewitnesses to the thing you actually did, or they witness the thing they're actually witnessing is your unrepentance.
Yeah.
So when I've had to do this, I've had to go to the next step. Even when I was pastoring a church, I would call people up and say, could you just be in my office at this time? What do we need to talk about? Second step of church discipline. That's all they know.
Yeah.
They know that I won't say who, I won't say what. They don't know the situation until they arrive and see the 2 people.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now let's sit down and talk. And it's to keep it as private as possible. It's because if the reconciliation happens, no one ever need know that there was a conflict.
Yeah.
And that's not what we see on social media.
Yeah.
That's not what we see, unfortunately, with Christian ministries that are quick to go after and attack others to really, unfortunately, promote themselves. That's a big thing of what you and I were talking about earlier.
It's clickbait. It creates clickbait.
Correct.
And so when you get the clicks, you get the growing ministry, and and that's we need to examine our motives in those particular areas. Is that why we're doing it? Or what is the reason for why we are doing these things? Are we following biblical precedents and giving our brothers grace if they are truly our brother?
Yeah.
And so often we see, and we were just talking about this even over dinner, is what sort of a testimony and a witness are we given to the unbelieving world when they see within the Christian community they see this this backstabbing and this infighting that I do not believe brings glory to God. And I think you've probably encountered the same thing, Andrew, but even just doing a podcast, I have people that address different things that I've said, producing their own podcasts or blog articles. And honestly, most of the time, I don't even respond to those things. Now, maybe I should respond to it more than what I do, but most times I don't even respond to it because once I've addressed a topic and I believe I've done it sufficiently, I don't think that there's any reason to continue to go back and forth and to defend every time somebody says something negative about me. Yeah. There's no reason to defend it. If it's just against me personally, then I'm just going to let that go. But if it is something in reference to maybe some error that needs to be addressed when it comes to in pertaining to the gospel itself, or biblical truth, then there are times absolutely that we need to do those responses, and we need to do them. But this quick for self-defense and taking care of making sure that my own character and everything is always defended, I think we're too quick often to do that.
Well, I'm sure nobody's going to disagree with your last episode. There's going to be complete agreement. No one's going to
I've already experienced the disagreement on that one. So.
But the thing is that you bring up the clickbait. This is a way that the world uses to generate attention on social media, to generate likes, to generate attention. Because in the social media world, the more that someone is going to click on something, the more people are going to comment, the more they're going to like it or respond to it, the more activity, the more people will see it, the more people will know about your ministry.
Yeah,
that is a worldly way of going about things, and it's a thing of what's the motive. If you're doing it as you and I shared someone that would promote things that they know other people don't believe, but state it just to get the clickbait.
Yeah.
And that's the issue I have, is people that will do things that they know are lies and deceit just to promote the ministry, just to get the clicks, just to get the likes, just to get seen.
Yeah.
Is that a way a Christian should be going about it?
Well, and that shouldn't even belong in the toolbox of any Christian. I mean, just at all. We are followers of the one who is the truth. And the way that we deal with others and the way that we represent others should be grounded in truth. This is the testimony that we are to be to the world. We are to be an example of those, and the world spots this every time.
Mm-hmm.
They see the hypocrisy, and they'll point it out. I mean, I've seen it over and over where atheists and agnostics will very quickly. Now, obviously, there's an apologetic opportunity. You don't have the grounding in order of which to even make the objection that this is hypocritical, is hypocrisy wrong. But why do they even have the opportunity to point it out?
Well, the thing that gets interesting with it is you're saying, right, so here you have people who will do this. And I told you and I talked about this earlier over lunch. I went to a debate, 2 debates actually, with Matt Slick debating 2 different atheists.
Yeah.
At the time, there was an atheist son that was going on in his personal life, some things he did. And I was asking different atheists, do you think what he's doing wrong? Oh, yeah. Over the first night, I'd ask several of them, would you call him out publicly? No, I'd never do that. And they all had different excuses. The second night, I was talking to a guy that after having built a little bit of a rapport with him, this is what he said to me. He says, Andrew, I like you, but I got to be honest. You're the enemy. This guy is doing a great job of destroying Christianity. I will never speak out publicly against him. And I thanked him for his honesty and then walked away and said, boy, this atheist understands what Christians should be understanding.
Yeah.
that we should be defending one another against atheist attacks, not jumping. Because unfortunately, this is what I end up seeing. If you get someone that's a heretic attacking James White, you'll get people that may be a believer with James White, but they don't like James White. So what do? They side with a heretic.
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
Because, we don't like James White or whoever it is.
Yeah.
And it's really, I came up with a new term I told you earlier. And this came out from the Judge Not conference, because I was really upset with how someone was trying to destroy one of the humblest man I have ever met, and that's Justin Peters.
Yeah.
He's got to be the humblest man I've ever met, one of the godliest men I know. And to have someone sitting there to attack him, because Justin disagrees with him on something. And the irony was, everyone was telling Justin what his position was on something that he never
even stated. Yes, never publicly stated.
Anybody that said, "Oh, I know his view on it," no, you know what this other person's view is on it. And it really bugged me. And I've been for years, there's probably 4 or 5 years that I've been against this kind of mindset, because when I started into ministry, I started getting attacked by different ministries. And I remember talking with a friend of mine, Matt Slick, and I said to him, this group is what they're saying, and this is, all this kind of stuff. And he basically tried to explain to me, as someone who's been in ministry longer, he said, look, unfortunately, this is the way ministry goes. He says, you have a lot of ministries out there that what they do is find a ministry a little bit bigger than them. They trash them, try to steal their people, and try to build up a bigger platform and following from dividing other ministries. And then they just move on to another one and another one and another one. And I've been against this for a long time. It's one of the things that I made a change in Striving for Eternity, and why we took on Bible Thumping Wingnut, and changes you saw within Bible Thumping Wingnut that you and I talked about. We could talk about maybe later. But when I was seeing what was going on with Justin, I came up with a term. We deal with Islam. I've written a book on Islam, and Muslims practice a practice called taqiyya, where in Islam you can lie to protect the Christian or the Muslim faith. I think there's a Christian taqiyya. And Christian taqiyya is when you have people that use lies and deceit to protect their own ministry.
But notice that that's even worse than Muslim taqiyya. And you know what the difference is? They're protecting their own ministry. The Muslim is lying to protect his faith.
Well, they will think that they're protecting God's ministry, but when you're using lies and deceit, I'm sorry, it's no longer God's ministry.
Yeah,
God doesn't need to use.
You've abandoned a Christian ministry at that point. Yeah, it's really saddened me actually in seeing a lot of, and I don't try to get into it. In fact, you're not going to see me into Facebook in a lot of these comment streams, because I just stay out of it. I'll jump into it when I think it's actually necessary, but most of the time I don't even want to get into the discussion when we're dealing with things that ought to be issues that we can agree to disagree sometimes, and be gracious about it. And you know what? And sometimes we can agree to disagree, and we can both strongly state our position, but at the same time still consider the other person a brother in Christ, and not making comments about he needs to be born again simply because we simply because we have a different view on something that is clearly a secondary issue.
Well, look, Matt Slick and I are good friends. We have a lot of secondary issues we disagree on.
Absolutely. There's a good example.
And it's something that actually we've been asked. We're going to be in New Jersey the first week of October. And at the New Jersey Apologetics Conference. And one of the things they actually asked was, would you and Matt debate the issue of gifts? Because they think it would be helpful for their congregation, their attendees. And the thing is that it's the way we go about the discussion. We disagree very strongly. We have very hard views that we hold to. And yet it's not going to ruin our friendship. It's not going to be that we're going to call each other heretics or, say that they're not saved. It's the manner in which we're going to conduct that conversation, that we should do it with love and charity. This is someone I'm going to spend eternity with. And I have to keep that in mind. I mean, people don't understand when we started the ministry, Striving for Eternity, it doesn't mean how you get into a right relationship with God. It had to do with after you're in a right relationship with God. How do you view everything?
Striving for the eternal ministry of the kingdom of God.
I mean, it's when I'm going to have a debate or discussion with Matt Slick over something that I disagree with him strongly, I'm not going to sit there and make my theological position more important than eternity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're gonna be in eternity together. My position and me being right is not more important than God being right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the thing where I think so many people get into trouble, is because, like you said earlier, you get people that start saying, well, this is the view, and this is how I do it, and this is the way it should be done because it's how I think it should be done.
Yeah.
That's when a change occurs, because now all of a sudden it's not about what is right, but who is right. And I'm making it that I must be right.
Yeah.
And you see people that divide over theology on issues that the reality, they don't even know the other side of the argument.
Yeah. Well, I mean, case in point, I mean, I can't even believe I have you in here, Andrew. I mean, you're a dispensationalist. And
you mean I'm biblical? Okay, good.
So, you know, there we go. There's an example. I mean, we can still be brothers in Christ. Matt Slick, I would have the same disagreement with him on the continuation of the gifts. And I think on baptism, him and I would disagree.
Yes,
but he's a brother in Christ,
yeah.
and there's no doubt about it. We are together on the gospel. And those,
it's okay, because I firmly believe both of you will agree with me when we get to heaven. Okay, so yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
See,
well, we'll have to have a discussion with an open biblical text on that, but that'll be something that we'll have to do it sometime. That actually might be an interesting discussion sometime to have. Is have a contrast between dispensationalism and covenant theology. Well, in particular, 1689 federalism. I would say
that would be different, because I've done one with Matt Slick.
I would have some definite, and those of you guys that have listened to a few episodes I've done on covenant theology, is I would have significant differences also with, you know, Westminster federalism and covenant theology, which you and I would probably agree on those particular critiques that I would make. So, we can have those discussions. We can have those dialogues. We can have iron sharpen iron,
mm-hmm.
and both improve both our own understanding of Scripture, be willing to admit that you know, we're not always right in everything. My views have changed over the years in different areas, and that is because of iron sharpening iron, and we have to be willing to do those things.
It's going to come to a question of this: what becomes more important, right? So I was speaking in a Presbyterian church. And in the Presbyterian church that I had been speaking at, the pastor was there. Someone comes up, a visitor, first-time visitor. He comes to the church and says, walks up to me afterwards and says, look, I grew up in a Baptist church, but what would be different between how I grew up and this church here and their beliefs on something like baptism? So my response, I said, well, I'm a Baptist. So I would disagree with this church's position, but let me explain to you this church's position. And what did I do? I didn't try to convince them how wrong they were. I'm there at their pulpit representing them. What am I going to do? I identified that I have a different view than them, but I explained Presbyterian baptism. This pastor afterwards said to me, Andrew, I wish people in my congregation understood Presbyterian baptism as well as you, a Baptist, do. And why? Because I didn't misrepresent their position. I didn't argue from my position. I clearly said that there was a difference between what I believe in this church, but I explained their view, and I had no problem with that. To me, what's more important, the guy gets saved. Right? Baptism will follow afterwards.
Absolutely. And you know what?
It'll be a
and if he wasn't and if he wasn't saved before, the Presbyterian would give him a believer's baptism. So there we go.
Actually, they did that the day I had been preaching. They did a believer's baptism with sprinkling. But
well,
you know, it was close.
There we go. They got close. So there we go. So,
but that's a great example, because here's the thing. I know so many Baptists that argue that Presbyterians don't believe in believers' baptism. And the issue is they do.
They do.
They
Absolutely.
believe, and this becomes an attack that people do, attacking someone's view without really understanding it. Presbyterians believe in a Presbyterian baptism. They may even, as I know of one, where they'll even use immersion as the means. But
I have heard of Presbyterians using immersion as the means.
It's not an issue that you say, well, they're not from, they are, and they believe in a believer's baptism. They just also believe in a baptism into the covenant, which is not the same symbolic thing as the believer's baptism always.
And we're talking about properly representing other Christians' views, but I think we should be just as strongly desirous of representing other worldviews also.
Yes.
What about Islam? What about properly representing that Muslim that's sitting across from you, and maybe he's not a raging jihadi. Maybe he's not sitting there just waiting for the opportunity to cut your throat. Should you misrepresent his view of Islam, or should you address what he really believes so that you can get to the gospel with him?
Well, Islam's a great example. Most people that profess to be Muslim understand Islam as much as most Christians that profess to be Christian.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so first understand that just because he says he's a Muslim doesn't mean he's actually practicing and following the beliefs of Islam.
Yeah,
it means that he was raised in a Muslim household.
Yeah.
So, that's one thing to take into account. But the reality is, one of the things that I think has been a benefit to me is the number of times I've been witnessing to Muslims, and I'll have Muslims explain that I understand Islam better than any non-Muslim they've ever met.
Yeah.
And what that's done, I had one encounter in New York. As you know, I do a lot of open air preaching in New York. One of the guys that's with me in ministry, Dr. Anthony Silvestro, was up preaching, and there was a Muslim family challenging him. And so he did what anyone would do. And instead of addressing the Muslims himself, he just said, "Hey, my friend Andrew's over there and would love to answer any of your questions," and just avoided the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I ended up dealing with this whole family. But the reality was this: in the discussion, they were arguing that every Christian believes in 3 gods.
Yeah.
Now, the advantage of being in Union Square with 20 other believers is I started picking people off one and another. Give me a definition of Trinity. Give me a definition of Trinity. And they would all say 1 God, 3 persons.
Yeah.
Saying it different ways, but that essentially. And then one guy said, all right, I'm getting the point. And I said, you said every Christian believes in 3 gods. No Christian believes in 3 gods.
Yeah.
That's what the Quran teaches we believe.
It is. Yeah.
I said, and so at the end of the conversation, I said, now, would you agree that in everything we've just talked for 2.5 hours, would you agree that everything I said about Islam was fairly represented? He said, yes. You did not say a single thing that I could say that is not accurate to Islam. I said, okay. Now, what I've also shown you is that what the Quran teaches of Christianity does not represent Christianity.
Yeah.
And that's a proof that the Quran, the author of the Quran, could not have
been God.
Could not have been God because he couldn't have been.
He didn't understand it.
Christianity.
Yeah.
He understood heretical Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. And he addressed it as one who didn't understand it, which is probably one of the strongest proofs of the falsehood or the false nature of Islam. But there you go. There's a case in point where it was on the reverse side, and you had to spend time correcting the false belief. And it was a barrier to getting to the real issues for let's say a Muslim trying to even convert you.
Yeah.
And so it goes the other way around. When we're talking to a Muslim, and if he has to say, well, no, wait a minute, no, that's not what I believe. So often in our evangelistic opportunities, the best thing to do is don't immediately place the person into a particular box, whether he even claims to be an atheist. I mean, most people on the street that I've talked to that claim to be atheists, they're different than the ones you meet on YouTube. Did you ever notice that?
Oh, yeah.
They're completely different. When I talk to an atheist on the street, he's usually only an atheist for about 2.5 minutes. And then they're not atheists
they're
anymore.
Agnostic.
Then a lot of times they even ban agnosticism. I've even had them become theists.
Yep.
But they're different from the YouTube atheist crowd. I can't just put that person into that category. I need to talk with them. What is it that you actually believe?
Correct.
What are your beliefs? Because that's what I'm concerned about. If I'm concerned about this person's salvation, I want to bring the gospel to him because I care about his eternal destiny and not about either winning an argument or showing him how foolish he is or anything of that nature. But I want to get to the gospel. That needs to be our motivation, whether we're talking to a Muslim, whether we're talking to an atheist, whether we're talking to a Mormon. We need to talk with them about what they really believe.
Yeah. This is when as you know, from a Jewish background, I was because of my family background, because I'm a Korahite, that's a very important family within Judaism because of the temple. And we had rabbis. I live in one of the largest Talmudic studies on the East Coast. And so that I had rabbis that wanted to convert me back, and we would sit and we would talk. And this one rabbi gives me hours and hours of tape, about 18 hours of tape of this rabbi. He says, this rabbi knows the New Testament better than anyone I know. He says he knows the New Testament maybe even better than he knows the Old Testament. Now, he doesn't use those terms, but for our audience that may not know the Hebrew words, but the thing is, he's saying this guy really knows it. I listened to these tapes. Now, to a bunch of rabbis who don't know the New Testament at all, this guy sounds like he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
But he's mixing Catholicism and Mormonism.
Yeah.
Now, to a trained ear like mine who understands Christianity, I pick that up. To someone who knows Christianity, knows Catholicism, knows Mormonism, I can pick up those distinctions. But to the rabbis in his audience, don't know it at all. I said I would be glad to debate this guy anytime he's in town, because he doesn't understand Christianity, but you who know nothing thinks he knows a lot.
Yeah.
I debated Joshua Evans, who's in the same boat with Islam. He goes and speaks to Muslims, saying he used to be a former Christian youth minister. He was never a minister. He was converted to Islam at 17 after doing a 1-year study of 14 major world religions and knows them all. No. At 16, you were not a pastor.
Yeah.
You were not a minister. You might have been a leader in the youth group, but you were still under the pastors in the, of the youth group.
I was a youth group president when I was 17.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
does that make
that makes you a youth
qualify me as a youth
minister?
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's what he lies to his own audience just to get jobs. That's even But here's the thing that I end up finding is here you got people who what they do is they say these things to audiences that know nothing. And so I debated Joshua Evans, and the Muslims in the audience said his study growing up in a Christian home, having not really understood Christianity, gave him more authority than myself, who at that time had been studying and had a master's degree in theology and had studied it for 27 years. They said they'll trust his word over mine.
Yeah.
He understands because he's an authority. Why is he an authority? He was someone who didn't understand what he really believed. And so what you end up with is this is what ends up happening. People talk to their own audience about something that people don't like. If it's Islam, you have Christians that speak on Islam.
Yeah.
And when after 9/11, you had a lot of people out claiming to be authorities on Islam. And this is really how my book, What Do They Believe, started, was because after 9/11, I was asked if I would study and research Islam to give what Islam actually believes. And so that's what I did. I went to give a understanding of Islam. And what ended up happening with it is I realized that a lot of the Christians that were supposed experts on Islam were not teaching what the Quran taught.
Yeah.
And a lot of people held them up. But when you speak to a Muslim, guess what happens? They reject it out of hand, just like I did with the Jewish rabbi. I rejected what he said out of hand because I immediately identified he's misrepresenting it.
Yeah, in the same way that when there is a Muslim who's misrepresenting Christianity, we immediately recognize that this guy doesn't understand what we believe. We don't have respect for his knowledge of what we believe. The reverse is also true. If a Christian is misrepresenting Islam, they're going to have the same reaction.
Correct.
They're not going to respect that Christian as somebody, as any sort of an authority to listen to on anything.
Yeah.
So it should be imperative for us to learn and to know what they believe so that they can respect what we know. And that doesn't create that barrier to the gospel. But I see this trend in Christianity where, in particular, it seems like when it comes to Islam, that people don't really even care if they're misrepresenting. They claim to be Christians, but yet they don't seem to even care that they're misrepresenting Islam.
Correct. And
that just doesn't even belong in the category.
Not just Islam.
Christian.
You have this with Mormonism. You have it with Jehovah's Witnesses. You have it with a lot where they do this. And that's why I ended up writing the book that I wrote, What Do They Believe? People will ask me, oh, so this book refutes Islam and Catholicism and Mormonism. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It tells you what they believe. That's what makes it different, because I'm not trying to refute them. I'm not trying to attack them. I'm saying this is what they believe. So when you get into a discussion with them, you could sit down and say, is this what you believe? And they're going to say, yes. Why? You're knowledgeable about my beliefs.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I'm knowledgeable about your beliefs. You're not knowledgeable about my beliefs. Let me explain to you what the gospel is.
Yeah.
And they're going to try. We have a study guide that goes with the book that actually we had out for a long time. We have a missionary in the Muslim countries. He uses that study guide. He starts on the 3rd chapter on Islam. The reason, he said he has found it the most effective tool because when he goes through the lesson on Islam, and he says, let's just study world religions. They study first with Islam because they see it's accurate. They say, I can trust this.
Yeah.
When they go back to Judaism and Catholicism and everything else, they start looking at this going, well, I can trust this source because they were right about Islam, something I do know about. And then he ends up getting into a defense of the Christian doctrine and is able to explain the gospel to them over and over again.
Yeah.
And but like you said, if I misrepresent what you believe, I'm not going to see what you say is credible.
You've just created a barrier. I remember one time I was flying to San Francisco, and I was sitting beside a Muslim, and he was sitting there with his iPad, and he was reading the Quran in Arabic right beside me. And so I started talking with him, and he was like almost shocked at what I knew about Islam. Now, I am no expert on Islam, but I knew enough that he was very surprised at what I knew when it came to the content of the Quran and stuff like that. And that opened a doorway for me to have a continued conversation with him and actually take him through the Christian gospel. Yeah. And that would not have happened if I wouldn't have had a concern and a care for recognizing what Islam believes and then asking him, is this what you believe? And having that dialogue with him, you earn that respect from the other person.
And that's a key what you just said. Don't assume you know what they believe just because they say I'm Muslim, I'm Jehovah's Witness, I'm Mormon. Ask them, because there's going to be people, especially if it's Catholicism. Most Catholics don't believe in Roman Catholic doctrine.
Yeah, very few. I don't know if I've encountered one yet.
the only ones I've ever encountered are cardinals and bishops. Priests. But the reality is, just because someone says they're a Muslim, I had a guy in New York said he was Muslim, but he was mixing Islam with Eastern mysticism, which I never seen that before. But if I just took him and said, "Oh, you're Muslim, you believe this," that's a big difference than me asking him, "What is it you believe? What is it you believe?"
Yeah,
All
right. Did you want to talk? You want to jump to the next topic a little bit, and kind of just close it out? We've been going for about.
Oh, you can keep track of how long we've been going.
Well, let's see here. How long have we been going? This doesn't have a time on it, but I think we've been going for about an hour, a little bit less. But let's talk about. We were talking about this a little bit over lunch too, and talking about the differences between philosophy and theology. Yes, and what should as a Christian, first of all, what is philosophy and what is theology, and does it matter, as a Christian, what we hold in primacy? Does that have any effect upon the way that we even interpret Scripture, about the way that we look at God's revelation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and as I said to you earlier, I'm working on a new syllabus for our academy, our Striving Fraternity Academy, on logic. And the first thing I want to do is give a short introduction to philosophy. And the issue I'm seeing is that there's a big difference between philosophy and theology, and which one you hold as more important.
Yeah.
I like when I've been asking different people get their opinions. I really like what John MacArthur had explained to me is that philosophy is a tool, but theology is the truth. And I really think that nails it, because philosophy is something that we use.
Yeah.
We use it to understand the theology, but the theology doesn't change. The theology is not a tool that we use. It is what it is. It's the truth.
It's propositional revelation that God has given us. And philosophy doesn't get us to propositions that we can know with the certainty that we can, the propositions that God has revealed to us in a special revelation.
Yeah. And I think what you end up having is, depending where you want to focus your background, if you focus on theology versus if you're going to start going down the road of philosophy, I know several people that have gone and gotten their doctorate, one in theology or philosophy. And what I find is a lot of guys that go down the road of philosophy have a very different way of addressing theology.
Yes. Yeah.
And a different way of addressing the Bible. I mean, look, coming from a Jewish family, what we would do is we argue. That's what Jewish people do. It's a family activity, right? You sit around the dinner table and you debate issues. It's why so many of us become lawyers, right? It's just the only place you get paid to do the debate, right?
Yeah.
So and win.
Yeah.
But it affects the way you're going to view things. So why is it that if you understand Judaism, they're always looking for loopholes? They're looking for these creative ideas to explain things.
Yeah.
It's because they're trained to debate. They're trained to look for those things. Philosophy is going to look at the Bible from that same kind of mindset.
Yeah.
I tend to see, this is not always the case, because I know plenty of people that have PhDs in philosophy, and they're not in some wacky position.
Yeah.
But a lot of times you'll see people that they start addressing the scriptures philosophically instead of theologically. And I think it gets into trouble. They start trying to re-examine it, and instead of taking what the scripture says in a plain reading, they start saying, well, let's see if this could mean this, and we can say, okay, there could be this argument. I'll pick on a friend of ours, but who's they're Genesis 1 and 2 it's really an argument against the ancient Near East deities of the time and things like that. Yeah. Could that be? Sure, that could be the argument, but the question is,
it could be that.
It could be,
and at the same time also still be literal.
Exactly, which is how Jesus used it to be literal. So that was enough convincing of me that he meant it to be literal, since he wrote it.
I didn't quite understand how. I've heard that particular argument, and I didn't understand how that was mutually exclusive.
It's not.
It's not, because it could at the same time be accomplishing both. God has that ability to do that.
And our mutual friend that holds this, he'll clearly say he's not young earth, he's not old earth. He doesn't think that's the issue.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is, he's saying that the text is not addressing this issue at all. It's just a literary argument.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it could be, and that might be, but it doesn't negate the other thing. I think what it does for the philosophers is just avoid it.
I think that's, once again, looking at it in kind of in a mutually exclusive way, saying if it has this literary construct, therefore it cannot have it's not even addressing the age of the earth or the way that God created or anything like that. I think that's looking at it in a way that it can only be exclusively one or the other. Yeah.
Well, I think where some of it came about was guys who have a background in philosophy that started looking at this and saying they see that the text, I would say very clearly, teaches a young earth, very clear, 6-day creation, and they're looking at this and saying, well, but the science says this, and how do like theistic evolution was one attempt to bridge the gap. I think there were some folks that looked at this and said, hey, here's another way to basically to bridge the gap, is to say, look at this. This doesn't have to be speaking to this. This could be speaking of a literary style that's very different that would be to an ancient Near East culture, and therefore they can still hold to an old earth, even though the text seems to say young earth.
It was interesting. Once I had a conversation with somebody from, I'm trying to remember the name of the ministry.
Logical Belief.
No. He does a lot of work on, he's an astrophysicist, and
Jason Lisle?
No, not Jason Lisle. This would be he would be really his nemesis.
Ross?
Yeah, Hugh Ross. Yeah. What's the name of his ministry?
I'm trying. Reasons to Believe.
Reasons to Believe. That might be it.
I think it.
Yeah, I believe that's it. But I was talking to somebody that was representative of his ministry, and I asked him this question. I said, how do you know? Can you tell me? Can you give me a reason for why you know that a God, not the God of the Bible, but a God did not create the universe 15 minutes ago, and simply implanted into your mind everything that you know as everything that you believe is. And he tried to make some arguments from general relativity. I said, no, hold on just a second here. Everything that you think you know about general relativity was put into your mind by that. And finally he just stopped. And I said, well, you're a Christian, right? Yes. Okay. And I said, so how do you know? And he finally said, well, God has revealed it. And I said, okay, well, that actually also destroys your other position, because if you have to appeal to revelation for why you know with certainty that the universe was not created 15 minutes ago, is how you also know it was not created 15 billion years ago.
Yeah.
And that is right there. That's the naturalistic assumption that identifies it and just shows it right there that is what they're bringing. They're importing an assumption of naturalism into the way that they're looking at the past, and that is a philosophical assumption.
Yeah.
It's a way of looking at the world through a philosophical construct of that everything that we see is the result of natural processes, and then importing that into a text of the Bible, which is a supernatural revelation that says that God did it in this way. And then saying that that's not possible. So if that person would be consistent, he would appeal to God's revelation for both reasons.
Yep.
And not just the long, deep time one instead of the short time.
You know, when I was talking with Matt Slick about it, he said his view was, he said, you know, the sciences, when you looked at the sciences, theology used to be called the queen of the sciences.
Yeah.
And philosophy would have been underneath that,
yes.
like every other branch of science. And in other words, what upholds all of these things is theology.
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
the others are just studies of what God has created.
Yes.
And so if you don't start with the theology as the foundation, as this propositional proof that or precept that comes from God,
yes,
that's the underlying argument for everything is built
off of that,
what God did.
Yes. Yeah. And going into philosophy as your starting point is taking something that is on top of the foundation and trying to put it and making it the foundation. It just doesn't work.
And philosophy is not going to get you to the answers.
No, it can't.
Philosophy will get you to, there is a being out there that created everything. That's about as far as it can get you, and it can't take you further than that.
I'm not even convinced. This would be a good discussion. Yeah. I'm not even convinced it can even get you there because you have to have assumptions. You have to assume certain things philosophically to even come to that that don't make sense without the theological grounding.
Correct.
I mean, even the theistic proofs that you have in classical apologetics and evidential apologetics, they require biblical presuppositions to even work. And so
well, as presuppositionals, you and I both hold that there's presuppositions that are true, that you have to be the necessary starting points.
Yeah.
Right. God exists. He has spoken.
Yeah.
Those are two presuppositions that are required. Now,
and everybody has those.
Everyone has them.
And everyone has that. That's the thing that a lot of times people don't understand is what we're saying. We say that is everybody actually has that presupposition. The atheist is talking to you. He is relying on the fact that God has spoken that he exists.
Correct. And because otherwise your philosophy doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
And that's why you can get in these, well, you're in the matrix. See, that's when people are trying to carry out philosophy to its logical conclusion, trying to remove God and he has spoken.
And that's what you're left with.
Yeah. You're left with absurdity.
Yeah.
It's the only thing, if you remove the theology and look at the philosophy without a theology base, you get to absurdity.
It was just what we were talking about before. You were talking about John Frame's book on the history of philosophy, and John Frame brings out in that book about the antithesis between rationalism and irrationalism. As the unbeliever tries to become more rational, he has to become irrational.
Yeah.
And the more irrational he becomes, he sees what's happening, and so then he strives to become more rational. And the more rational he comes, he has to become it. It leads to irrationalism, just like you said. So there's this antithesis and there's this conflict within non-Christian worldviews between rationalism and irrationalism that can't be resolved without the biblical worldview.
Yeah, because I mean, they're going to, whether they like it or not, they have an underpinning of what's real. And what's real is because God created it.
Yeah, and they can't escape it.
They can't escape it. And so they're gonna say, well, we look at it this way, or we look at this, and they're trying to answer these philosophical questions. But the problem is, wait a minute, how do you even have the ability to reason? You're relying on things like logic. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
I mean, chemical reactions don't produce logic.
Yeah.
They don't produce truth or knowledge. These things are there because God created them. And if you ignore that starting point, and then you try to say, okay, we can put philosophy as more important than theology. We're going to try to make our case philosophically to prove theology.
Yeah.
You have it backwards.
We got the cart before the horse at that point. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Andrew, for joining us today. Was there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
Having me in the studio. It's,
well, we're cramped in here.
And someone joked on Facebook saying that, I got to stop crashing people's studios. Bible Thumping Wingnut's yours. Actually, I never been to the Bible Thumping Wingnut studio.
Oh, really?
I just took it over in virtual.
Okay,
land.
I gotcha.
But,
So what did you think of the Logical Belief Ministry studio when you saw it?
I like it. There's a lot of nice books here.
As long as you look in that direction, right?
Look, all I know is there may be some things missing later.
Yeah, we will definitely be checking.
Oh wait,
Andrew's
hey, wait,
pockets
actually,
before
no,
he
wait, hey,
leaves.
you know what? I do like. Look at this.
Oh yeah,
I
there we
like
go.
it. Look, and
Yeah.
you're
There's
like
even a
halfway
marker in
through
it. Yeah, there's a marker in it.
I'm liking the book. You know, it's good. You got What Do They Believe by some heretic named Andrew Rappaport. So
Yeah, I
that's
don't know
good.
why in the world that's in there. So I don't know. Did my wife sneak in here? She must have.
I do got it. I got my new book coming out. I do like. I will admit that I like the fact that you're as you know, either we'll say anal or not, but you know, OCD, that you have everything lined up, you know, orderly.
Notice all
I
the
do.
notice
You
all
got
the
the-
books on justification,
Yeah.
on covenant theology,
Hey,
and then I've got everything kind of together.
I like that you got me between James White and J.C. Ryle. And how could you, you know, I mean, how could you be in a bad place there? But I got the new book coming out. Hopefully, I'm hoping in about 2 months. I got final edits that I'll finish up this week and get it back to the editor. Then it goes off to Phil Johnson, who I'm hoping that he now has time to write the forward.
Very good.
I don't know what his schedule. He wanted to wait till after it was edited and we got through the edits, and so he's got to see his time frame, whether he has the time now to do it. I don't want to delay the book, so that might be an issue. But
from what I did read quite a bit of the manuscript, and what I said of it was that I think it is a fantastic book for a young Christian, somebody that's new in the faith, that wants to study theology, wants to get into the deep things of God, and wants to understand what Christianity is about. I think it's a fantastic primer, and I don't really know of any sort of systematic theology out there that's like that.
Yeah,
you know, that doesn't isn't probably the closest one would be is and I don't even have it here. I gave it. No, I don't have it here. So a friend of mine has it right now. He's reading it. But that is why is it escaping me right now? I'm gonna have a brain fart. Pilgrim's Theology by Michael Horton.
Oh, okay.
Is one of those that is I think it's a really good start for a young Christian. But I think this is one of those really good primers.
What's neat that you say, because that's actually what originally I was going to call it, a systematic theology primer.
Yeah.
And we decided against it because that gives the idea that it's only for newer believers.
Yeah.
And you know, I had someone that read it that has done some study in theology. It was like, this is really good for all groups. One of the things I put in there that I think is going to be a little different is, because I don't know any books that really deal with textual criticism. Can we trust the Bible? And that's an issue, as you, I'm sure, get addressed every time on the streets. I wanted that right there for people when they're studying theology. Get that out of the way to realize we have strong arguments.
You know, I have a great story to tell you with that, actually. So I had your manuscript on my laptop at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I had somebody come into my office that I was talking about Christianity and the gospel, and his criticism was a textual critical criticism, which was basically, you know, the traditional, the typical street level argument that, you know, it's the telephone game thing. And you know what? I opened up your manuscript and I showed him that one diagram, and I took him through some of the stuff actually in your manuscript and showed it to him. So your manuscript has already been used in an evangelistic opportunity. So
did he end up realizing that the argument that
he realized right away. He abandoned it. He's like, no, I didn't realize that. Wow, that's so it was really great.
The telephone game sounds really, really good argument until you know the truth.
Yeah,
and the reality is not many people will deal with textual criticism until much later.
Yeah,
in study, and I didn't want that because this is the issue everyone deals with. So
it is. It's a really good thing to have, and and most systematic theologies don't have anything even like that in it.
Yeah, which is why I want to. So even for those people, I think this is where the one person who studies theology said, you know, he learned something. Well, it's probably because he studied theology but hasn't studied textual criticism.
Yes,
I wanted to include it early.
Yeah, no, that's a great addition, and I'm definitely I'll pick it up as soon as Andrew will send me a free we'll send me a free signed copy, but we'll deal with that when that comes. So So, all right.
It depends if I get another, lunch or dinner in the deal.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's see if you survive this one. So let's.
Hey, no, but it was great being with you. It was neat. I'm really glad to have you as part of the Bible Thumping Wingnet Network. You add a great value to the other podcasts that are already on the network. I always enjoy, as we were saying earlier. I mean, my heart is to see Christian ministries working together, promoting one another.
Yeah.
It's the reason that I started to reach out to ministries like Creation Revival, like Bible Thumping Wingnet, to say, look, we want to disciple you. We want to see you get bigger than us.
Yeah.
And be a ministry that supports other ministries.
Yeah.
And Bible Thumping Wingnet, which was a YouTube channel that turned into a podcast, took that same mindset and took that and expanded it. And now what you end up, instead of one podcast, they shared an audience with other podcasts like yours, and given a broader audience to other Christian podcasts and ministries. So instead of seeing it as competition, seeing it as we're all working to the same goal, the glory of God and the kingdom of God. And we all push forward when we're pushing one another forward. And that's the mindset and the model we want to have, not to be focused on our ministry, but to focus on God's ministry and what he's doing in his kingdom. And you've added, with Logical Belief, has added a lot of value to helping a lot of believers in good biblical thinking. My wife and I, as we were talking earlier, she appreciated the fact that the way you give the definitions of things, you don't, and then you work through that in a logical manner, so it's easy to understand, and there's not much wiggle room afterwards, because it's like, okay, it's all been thought through, and here's the argument laid out for you.
Yeah.
So it's a great value to the Christian community.
One of the things I mentioned over lunch too, but I would want to thank Tim for his. I think his heart is definitely in the right place when it comes to how he's been bringing on other podcasts without the mentality that it's there to grow the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast, but he's there to help other podcasts grow in their listenership and to grow in their ministry. And it's not about just growing that one podcast. It's there to grow all of them. And I definitely see his heart in that area. And I think it's in the right place. I think
you get to see something that most of your listeners will never see, which is you get to see where Tim is trying to help you as a podcaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Behind the scenes to say, hey, how can I help you be a better podcaster? How can I make your podcast better?
Absolutely.
Here's some equipment for you. Here's something. Why is he doing that? Because he wants you to have the best podcast you can have.
Yeah.
Which seems so different and so odd.
It is.
The way Christian
it really is.
Ministry seems to be working.
Yeah. And it goes back to that thing that we were talking about at the very beginning about having an attitude of reconciliation, about if we have differences. Not every podcast on the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network is in lockstep.
No,
we're definitely not.
Yeah.
There we do have differences, but we hope that we have grace with one another, and that we can have that attitude of reconciliation when it comes to the things that we can just agree to disagree on.
Yeah. I mean, when we get to heaven, there's not going to be any confessional statements or any of that. It's just going to be a Bible.
We'll be confessing before God every moment.
Us good Baptists have.
All righty. Okay. Well, thanks, Andrew, for joining us today. We're go ahead and take this out, but really appreciate it and appreciate your help with the network and everything that you contribute to that too. So keep it up.
Thanks for being here, having me here.
Yeah, no problem.
Don't you know that the unjust will not inherit God's kingdom? And through Adam's